Climate change presents the single biggest threat to sustainable food systems. Its widespread, unprecedented changes impact disproportionately, burdens the poorest and most vulnerable smallholder farmers. Join us as we discuss the threats and opportunities to food security in the country and how urgent action to combat climate change and minimize its disruptions is integral to food security. Follow the discussion on all our social media platforms. Standard Group, Farm Kenya, working to secure your growth. Brought to you by Farm Kenya through its partners.
Kuimarisha Kenya ni jukumu la Farm Kenya.
All right, welcome back to Farm Kenya Breakfast right here on KTN News and also on KTN Farmers. And today we are talking about food security and safety in the era of climate change. And earlier on, I was speaking to my distinguished panelists about the various varieties that farmers can look at, and also Kenyans on the ASAL regions can look at in terms of trying to make sure that at least they cushion themselves during this period. We also looked at the rainfall and how farmers can make sure that they plant the right crops during this time. And now I'm opening it up to the audience to just contribute to this, also asking the questions so that the panelists can also answer. And we are going to be starting with questions from the audience. I told you we have a live audience, and if you have a question, you can raise up your hand. All right. And my colleague Yusta is going to give you the microphone. All right, so you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Philip Kilonzo. I work with Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, heading the policy, advocacy, and communications work. I think this discussion and the theme is quite timely. Food security, safety in the era of climate change. I want to skip safety elements because safety is also too detailed, but focus more on the food security element and the climate change, and make some few comments, and probably also throws in some certain jabs. I think listening to the panelists, it was clear that they've not thought through the limits to adaptation. I think consistently they've indicated that we have a limitless spectrum within which we can actually expand the adaptation discourse. Yet those who are coming from the climate change world know clearly that there are limits to adaptation, and that is what we call loss and damage. So probably canvassing that would be quite useful in this conversation. Going back to the climate change, food security. I'm going back to the climate change because climate change is playing within the realm of water and temperatures. Mm-hmm. Those two variables are extremely important. You cannot talk about climate change without temperatures and without water. We may not be in position to deal with the rise in global temperatures within the short run, because that lies beyond us. Africa is only emitting 4% of the emissions. We know who is emitting the rest, the developed north. But coming to the water question is something that we can fix. We can actually begin to have foresight in terms of the investments that we need to do in water. The late President Kibaki had a bit of foresight, putting 1 million hectares under irrigation. But that foresight was lost. It was lost because the 1 million acres was seen from a corporatization approach, corporatizing agriculture, rather than really placing the small orders at the center of that particular investment. And I think within it, then there is a consistent pattern within which it's actually being lost, which I thought the panelists would actually speak to, that conspiracy, because it's a conspiracy. That investment is actually not taking the right trajectory, right direction in terms of ensuring that farmers are able to climate-proof the agricultural system through investment in water sector, which is so critical. And that begins also to speak to the current regime, because my points will be purely political. If you look at the current regime, there is overemphasis that is actually placed on investment in fertilizer. The arid areas and the semi-arid areas, that is not their priority. Yet that is where the salvation rests in terms of scaling food production, meaning that then there is a disconnect between the policy aspirations and the actions on the ground, and connect that backward to countries that were able to develop. Look at Australia. Look at Brazil, the drier part of Brazil. The investment in water sector was quite critical, interest-free by government, meaning that indeed there is a latitude within which this country can actually overcome global conspiracies that are being perpetuated on Africa and be able to address the food security challenge. We need to also fast forward 2010-2014 era. There was massive investment that was actually done in developing national adaptation plans, in which agriculture was a component. Probably the abbreviation of the national adaptation plans into NAPs forced those plans to take a nap and go into slumberland, because the actual implementation is not visible. And that connects then with a pattern that we see both in terms of the mainstream agricultural conversation and the climate conversation, where we are actually seeing disconnect in terms of the resources that are being pledged and the resources that are trickling down. Across all the African countries, and Kenya being no exception, rarely does government spend 65% of the budget allocated to agriculture sector on annual basis, and that is a fact. Then out of that, the little that trickled down to the communities is something else to hold on to. And that, because I'm being want to pause at that particular point, I'll just pause by saying that even in this country as we speak, we have funding from the FLOCA, which is actually meant to support communities and address issues of climate change. As we speak, it's still boardroom discussions. That money is yet to trickle down, and is alone. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to come to the panelists, starting with Dr. Lusike coming this way. Your reactions on what he has spoken about. What is the disconnect between these institutions? We're talking of research, we're talking of irrigation, we're talking of livestock, soils. What is the disconnect?
Financial support. If we had financial support, these people will work together, but we are working. I'm so sorry that the person in the audience is not aware at all, but a lot is being done on the ground. We're actually working together with the limited funding we have to be able to, because we know that individually we can't succeed, but together we make sense. We're partnered very closely with the Met people in the issues of predicting rain. They come and tell you this is what's going to happen. We have the tool, the CAOP, the Kenya Agricultural Observatory Platform, that you can look at, and it can tell you 7 days before and 7 days after when it's going to rain, and then what crops to grow. So we're actually partnering together using different forums, like as represented by Hamisi on e-extension. We're doing that. So trying to implement the government's policies. Yes, Kenya reports annually on our achievements towards now achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Where have we reached? How are we moving towards? We're not doing very well in a few things, but in others we've met the target and we're moving on track. This time is not a joke. The government has actually put measures in place with a lot of support from FAO and development partners to make sure that we're able to achieve this. I never knew in my life I would go to Masabi, but I'm now there and looking at them and their cropping systems and what they can grow. We're now working with Wajir County on production of date palm and stuff like that. We used to work a lot in the high rainfall, as said by my colleague, high, medium, low rainfall. We're never going to the Asals, but now we're in the Asals. And if you go online, you'll see the kind of products we have and who we're partnered with. It's not just Calvo, it's Calvo with academia and other partners, development partners and international research organizations working together, following our policy guidelines to deliver on what the government has said we need to do. The issue of trees, the 10% tree cover of Kibaki, the 30% tree cover of now Ruto. We're working towards that. You come and see our nurseries. We're working. It's just that some people don't travel enough to see the impact, the positive impacts of what the government is doing. They need to travel and see that we're actually moving on track, and we're doing our best to change this negative impact we did 20 years ago where trees were being cut. Now we're trying to repopulate the trees. Even the water subsector, they're having annual efforts where they plant trees, like Kakamega County. They plant trees along the rivers. And Karo has contributed. We contribute fruit trees. We don't want just the forest, but fruit, so that in the end, they can provide food for those communities living along the river. So there are things we're doing positively, just that people are not everywhere to see or even recognize what the government is doing.
All right, thank you for that. Let's get your reactions. on the point that he's spoken about.
Thank you very much. I will dwell a little bit on the issue of funding. According to Maputo Declaration, which is 10 years old now, it was agreed that African countries are going to put as much as 10% or above of their annual budgets to agriculture. What do we have today? 3%, 4% for Kenya, 5% for Kenya. And this is a big tragedy because agriculture is a mainstay. It controls the economic development of the country. It contributes to GDP. The lack of putting enough money in our national budgets to agriculture is terrible. Now, we are waiting for the people to produce the food. We, the urban people, are waiting for food to be produced by the rural people. But how much do they get? The rural communities produce the food, produce the water, clean up the air, and what do they get from the urban people? The urban people give them almost nothing, 3% of the budget. That's a big disaster. The other point I want to put across is the empowerment of the people. Government can only create environments for the people to operate. As we talk about big mega dams, we forget that this has been done before. It has been done, big irrigations have been done in Bura, they've been done in Pakera, they've been done in Tana River, they have done in many places. And what did we get? Failure. Because the people were not empowered. They are not being managed by the people. Government should provide an environment and let the people drive the processes of development. And this has to be heard loud and clear by the political class. The more we rotate around the political class to provide development and forget they're supposed to create the environment and the people develop themselves is where we are getting it wrong. Mm-hmm. And finally, when it comes to who is actually producing the food is being produced today in Kenya by our aging population. The youth are nowhere in agriculture, but they consume most of the food. So until we are able to have the youth involved in production and the whole production system and the value chain in food, we are all the time going to get it wrong. Once the older generation moves out and the younger generation is unable or does not have an idea on how to produce food, then we are going to only have rising food prices, more food insecurity, less health. So how do we involve the youth in agriculture? In the organization I work for, we are involving the youth in putting them in agriculture training so that they become agriculture and food entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And we believe that by doing so, we will be turning away from too much rhetoric, too much talk, too much publication, into too much action. Mm-hmm. That's where the secret is.
All right. All right. Let's get Japheth's your reactions.
Yes, I concur with the speaker that the government does not offer sufficient funding for agricultural services in the country. And that's why we have challenges in terms of guaranteeing food security for the Kenyan population. I think it is very important if a country or a government is going to feed its people, then there is need to also allocate sufficient resources to the sector, the agricultural sector, which again, I think contributes the highest percentage to the GDP. Yes. So it is the highest contributor to our gross domestic product. But then, the resources allocated to the same sector that drives the economy are very minimal. And then, now the issue of climate and climate variability, climate change and variability is also now affecting if the government is not going now, for example, to allocate more resources, expand, for example, the areas under irrigation, because if you are going to feed our people, then one of the actions like now that needs to be encouraged, that the area under irrigation be increased, especially now towards the arid, semi-arid areas. Most of the arable areas, I think, really are densely populated, and not much is really done. So we need to, the government needs to allocate the resources, try to put, especially the arid, semi-arid regions, put them under crop through irrigation. And that will only happen if sufficient resources are allocated. And then there is the issue of the small-scale farmer. We have some technologies. The simple irrigation technologies can also be cascaded down to the rural farmer, and they be able to produce a lot. Actually, these are the people who feed the Kenyan population, but not much is allocated to address or to bridge the gaps that they have, so that they are able to produce more. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, it is a good thing that it is time that our government allocates sufficient resources to the agricultural sector, and these resources should also be cascaded to the local, the rural farmer at the village. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Before we come to the two of you, I'm going to also get just two questions from the audience, and then now I'm going to get Hamisi and Kiari answer to them. So we're going to move to the audience also and ask them to just ask their questions, and then we come back here.
Good morning. My name is Josephine Ringera. I work for an organization called Gold Africa International. And this morning, I want to agree with our panel for the day on all the issues that they have actually given their feedback on. But I want to come out and make a clarion call. And this goes more to the government. And why do I narrow down to the government? Because the government is the one that provides the resources to actually implement all the good things that our panel has actually spoken about. And I want to say this about our country today, is that the situation is very bad. The drought situation is extremely bad. Anyone who has actually gone to the ASAL areas, and not only the ASAL areas, even areas that actually produced a lot of food, you will find that the crops have dried up. And the situation is calling for us as a country to treat this issue as urgent. I will say from the community I come from, in the olden days, people used to, when you get an enemy attacking you, you had someone beating the drums and saying the enemy is coming, and you take cover. And right now what we are doing here is calling out that the situation is very bad, and we are calling out that the government needs to do more. The rains, we are being told, are going to be suppressed. What are we doing about the rains that are going to be suppressed? Thank you.
All right, we can also get another second question, and then we come to the panel.
I'm Edward Moirore from Pelham, Kenya. It's a network organization affiliated by 57 members across the country and 42 counties. I do agree with the panelists, but my big concern is that we talk of agriculture being devolved. So this goes to the main duty bearer, our government. Yes, it is devolved, but what functions are devolved? And is that aligned with the resources? The answer is no, because what we are seeing in the counties that we are working in is that services are dwindling day by day, and projects are mainly by partners or through partners. But from what is ours, our revenue here, instead of even increasing the number of extension officers on the ground, those who are retiring, you see that there is no equal or rather commensurate action to repress them. So you find that even the policies that are there at the county level, only a few counties that have registered agroecology bills, meaning that those who have done so are very keen on promoting agroecology, the natural way of doing farming that has sustained us for centuries. And there is so much that can be done to face this issue of drought, issue of climate change. If we go back to our basics, we need to be serious around resources with what we are saying and what we are doing. Thank you very much.
All right, the last question from the audience, and then we come to the panel. Just be very brief so that we can tackle all these issues.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Brenda Ongalo. I am the head of legal at AfriStech. AfriStech deals with a product called Luna, and the reason we are here is we deal with digital farms. We provide a platform. It's good that the panelists have mentioned that there is need for e-extension services. Again, now this turns out to be a government bashing session, but what are the partners, what is the government and its partners doing with regard to, in as much as fine, we are talking about e-extension services, we are talking about using technology to promote agriculture. We know if you make something digital, you start attracting the youth, but what is the government doing with regard to providing, making sure that internet is affordable, or rather it's accessible to all the people, even in mashinani? And what is it doing to promote this particular, the apps that are already there? Because it's not enough to mention that we do have all these apps running. Secondly, the same government that wants the public and both the public sector and the private sector to intervene in matters climate change is not seen to promote practices that actually takes us towards the green economy. You cannot talk of climate change putting us in the danger zone and all sorts of things, yet it is the same government that is lifting bans against charcoal burning. It's the same government that now wants to move ahead and introduce, allow people to farm in forests without proper regulations. So what are the panelists, being members of organizations that actually partner with government and inform policy, doing to address those two issues?
All right, thank you so much. All right, now, Hamisi, when she was speaking about the youth and also even the extension services, I saw you nodding your head, just agreeing. So just contribute to this and just give us literally, when the panelists were speaking, they spoke about the average age of a farmer being 50 years. That's literally talking about agriculture retiring. Now, how do we make sure that we incentivize the youth and make sure they get into farming?
Thank you. Maybe at a policy level, I think there's been quite some conversation here, government.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you look at even Vision 2030, let's look at this is a three-pillar kind of approach that we have to adopt. Our issues are political as well as they are, as much as they're economic and social. And that we have to agree. Everyone has a part here. And I'll tell you, when you talk about political, and I've heard people talk about it, I've wondered how a ballot box could reach Muhuru Bay and an extension officer cannot be in Muhuru Bay. Or in Mandera, and you cannot have an extension officer there. So people just got to get their priorities right. That's one. And that should be a very straightforward thing. We don't need to have a lot of conversation about that. But again, we have issues of policies, really, especially in a developing world, at our level of comprehension of some of the things, policies really need to lead the pack. And who is supposed to develop this? You know, we have to comprehensively do them and do them together. I'll give you an example. If you go to the developed world where they do quite a lot of, probably you could say they really have some level of food sovereignty, the farm sizes in those countries are increasing and the number of farmers are decreasing. You come to a developing world like Kenya, the farm sizes are decreasing And the number of what we call farmers, in quotes, are increasing. I don't know if you get what I mean. Because every father in Kenya today in the rural village with 5 acres will give birth to 5 sons and be a farmer of 5 acres. But when the 5 sons come of age, each one of them start being farmers. And so now farming 1 acre each because they are subdivided. And when the 1 acre owner also gives birth to 5, then each of the sons have a 5th. And they continue farming. Who said everyone has to be a farmer at that level? You know, so we're going to have to deal with some of these issues at the policy level. You know, and so land use policy is something that we have to look at. Even at the county level when they are doing the CIDPs or the land use plans. I mean, these are things that have to be now conversed in this era, and we have to be realistic about them. We cannot continue like that. And that now brings us to the point that you're talking of the youth, for instance. If we're going to go into farming as a way of life, because my father did it, and my father's father did it, again there we're still not going to have any change. We must start approaching farming as a business. Even if it is 1 acre, let's get what can be grown in 1 acre to make commercial sense. If you have something left to feed yourself on, say hallelujah. But go in there when you want to say, I have 1 acre, I'll put watermelon here, and at the end of the day I want to sell it to make some money to take my kid to school and something like that. And then technology comes in. And this is also something that we have to create that environment, and then again we have to avail the technological tools. Carlo has quite a number that they have talked about. When we have those technologies, I'm telling you, you'll be able to attract the youth because you'll be making agriculture cool for them to go into. But again, this fallacy of youth getting into agriculture, and we want to just get them into agriculture to go in and do what? To plow? No. Agriculture has to also be looked at as a value chain approach. It all starts from the farm, ends on the fork. There are several other aspects and tenets in between that a youth can really participate in. A digital youth coming from an IT school can really help us with the digital agriculture. We are now digitizing. The government is even registering farmers, looking for a system. So a youth should concentrate, could get in there, not necessarily going into the farm. That will be contributing to food security. And I think a point we've really not been done justice to in this conversation, we now must start talking about food and nutrition security. Every time we talk about food security, because we'll get a lot of carbohydrates and all this type of stuff. If our population, the youth are still malnourished, then it's like those food insecurity. So we must also look at that aspect. Finally, for me, I think is that, like this year, somebody already mentioned it, the UN has also adopted, actually is moving towards this issue that we talk about. Can we get drought-tolerant crops and things like this? How do we promote that? The 2023 has been declared the International Year of Millet. And actually, FAO is leading this conversation. And now we are working actually with Migori County, and we are going to celebrate the International Year of Millet. And I think that every one of us will be invited to have this, to make some contribution into this conversation. But how did this happen? I want to tell you that this was pushed by India to the United Nations. Why? Because they saw the need they have on pulses. And they said, if we do not rally the world to support this production, we will not have enough for our population. We can influence this type of conversations and have the partners participate, bring in their resources, bring in their technical expertise so that we work together. Finally, for all the partners, we must also support the government, support the people of Kenya by having demand-driven solutions. We don't know everything, so we don't want to come with the solutions. But let's go down to the person down there. I told you, Mark from Alendo told me, for us, give us water, that are some things we'll do by ourselves. That's a youth. So let's go there and get what they need, then support them from there, because they also have a lot of knowledge, indigenous or otherwise, but they are able to produce, to contribute into food and nutrition security. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Kiarie, when you talk about urban farming, the size of farmers is increasing, but the land, the land is decreasing, and the numbers of farmers are increasing. So another challenge is agri-financing. So for the youth, let us just speak about this.
Thank you. I start with urban farming, and there are very many technologies out there which utilize small space, and people even in the urban areas, you can use your balcony to produce your own vegetables that you can consume at home, and that also contributes to the nutrition security we are talking about. And talking about nutrition security is also diversifying what we grow. We have seen farmers moving into monoculture, growing maize year in, year out. It's time we integrated other crops, be it pulses. You see, like now the number of pulses that are out there, we get most of the beans from our neighboring countries. We are not growing them here. And it's time that we integrated, we intercropped with other crops, and also using technologies that are out there. Carol mentioned about the various technologies for selecting the seeds, how to grow them. There are also applications the lady talked about. And I think it's time that we as partners at government, instead of pointing the finger only to the government, that we came together, brought all these technologies together, brought all these ideas that we have together, encourage the youth to be part of this, and show them that it makes money by going into agribusiness. Come to agrifinance. We have seen a lot of interest in banks investing in agrifinance, agri-insurance. But again, if you look at the requirements for youth who do not have collateral to be funded, there are a number of limitations. And I think it's also high time that the banking industry came on board and invested in agriculture in terms of supporting mainly the youth and integrating them in agriculture.
All right. Thank you so much, Kiarie. Now we are going to take a short break right here. And on KTN News, we have come to the end, but we are going to continue the conversation on KTN Farmers. Don't go too far. Remember, the hashtag is Farm Kenya Breakfast, and also another hashtag that we are using is food security. We're going to go for a short break. We'll be back with more, but remember, we are coming back on KTN Farmers TV.